Welcome to this video tutorial about how to pre-position parts and or assemblies in Mastercam and then import them into Calypso. There is a part 2 of this video which shows the exact same thing but in SolidWorks. So if you prefer to use SolidWorks over Mastercam, you might want to jump over to that video. All right, so we'll start by creating a new measurement plan. And we'll hit the CAD drop down and we'll say CAD file and load. And we'll load that same CAD file that we did in the beginning of this video series. We'll open up the air motor assembly.step, and that's available in the course information tab under the air motor folder. All right, so this imports as an entire unit here, right? And what we learned in the previous video series is that we can either move each part individually or we can move the entire assembly all by itself. Either way is valid. What I actually prefer to do is pre-position a lot of these things in either Mastercam or SolidWorks, so that way if I have to make some changes, I don't have to redo all the steps of moving the whole thing as one or moving things individually. This can be particularly helpful when you're mating fixtures around parts and things like that. But the first thing that we need to know is where is our coordinate system relative to our machine. So we'll go Planner and Measurement Plan Simulation. And let's turn on our CMM for this application. And let's set all this as normal. All right, so first thing we want to do is see how the part is oriented relative to the machine. Right, so it looks to me like, well, I guess for this step, we only really need to see the coordinate system. We actually don't even need to see the probe, so we'll turn that off for a second. We just want to grab a snapshot of this just so that we know what it looks like. So I'm going to open up PowerPoint, and I'm just going to start a blank presentation. And then I'll come over here to the snipping tab. You can see I already did this in preparation for this video. Let's just grab a snip of how the coordinate system is oriented, and this will help us to map this to what we're going to see in Mastercam. All right, and now we'll turn our machine position back on, and we'll show our stylus system here. And all I want to do is figure out where do we want to move this part to. Well, we really want to put this part sitting flat on the base. Right, so we want this surface here that's shown as the front, we want that to end up being the bottom. So we want to sit that flat on this base right at the center, let's say. Well, for this application, we can open up our joystick. We can move by machine system, and it looks like our total travel is about 20 inches. What it actually is 500 millimeters converted to inches. So let's say that our X is going to be about 10 inches. It's going to be somewhere in the middle here, 10 inches. That's very strange how it does that. We're going to be somewhere close to 10 inches. In our Y, we're going to be somewhere close to minus 10 inches. And then in our Z, we're basically going to be as far down as you can get, which is 500 millimeters divided by 25.4 gives you minus 19 inch 685. So our coordinate system is really going to be X positive 10, Y minus 10, Z minus 19.685. Now this isn't going to put us exactly in the center. If you want to put them exactly in the center, you have to do the math to basically divide 250 millimeters by 25.4. That'll give you the actual numbers. I prefer just 10 and 10. All right, so now that we know that, let's go back into Mastercam here. And we'll go File and Open. And let's go grab that same file that we just downloaded. And we're not seeing it here because I have this set to Mastercam files. Let's set the filter down here to all files, and we'll open up our air motor assembly. And this will open up as one big old file with a whole bunch of individual parts in it. Here you can see on my levels manager, this might be down here if you're using the default Mastercam layout, right? But I've moved mine over to here. On the level manager, I can turn things on and off, and that can be really helpful. Just keep in mind when you save these files out, it's only going to save what is visible on the screen. So you might want to just turn everything on. Just turn everything on here. Okay, but that can also be helpful if you're if you have some components that you want to help you see where things need to be, and then you don't want them to actually be in the CAD file, just hit the little X on the visible column here and they will go away. All right, so let's start by looking at our Planes Manager. And again, for you, that might be down here somewhere. For me, I've just relocated mine up here. I find it works a little bit easier for me. I'm going to right click on the top plane and I'm going to come down to duplicate. And now I have top-1. And then I'll right click on it and say edit. And this coordinate system is aligned with Calypso's coordinate system right now. So let's grab this and let's move this positive 10 inches. So I grab the x-axis line, this red line right here. And then I'm just going to type in the number 10 and hit enter. And then the next thing we have to move is our y-axis. And remember, we want to move our y-axis minus 10. So I hit enter once more just to save that number I typed in. Now, notice that I'm specifically highlighting this green line and I start pulling it back and I type in minus 10. I hit enter and that gives me the preview. I hit enter one more time and it saves it. And then this is kind of cool. This is another reason I like Mastercam and SolidWorks. I want to move down 500 millimeters, right? So I'm going to type in minus and then I'll do a parentheses 500 divided by 25.4, and this will give me the mathematical exact number of how far that is. It's minus 19.685. So you can type in mathematical functions directly into that window. Just hit enter to save it. And this little blue dot here is the preview of where you moved from, just in case you're curious. All right, and then we can rename this plane. We can rename it Calypso Import. And if it's helpful to you, you can actually just save this Mastercam file out as a template. You could do a file, save as, and you could come in here and call this Calypso Import Template and say save. And then you could just delete all of these files out of your levels manager here, and there's your generic template. And whenever you want to import something, all you have to do is move this part from this coordinate system over to the other coordinate system. Because if we import it right now, it really doesn't make any difference the fact that we opened it in Mastercam. We could save it right back out of Mastercam, we could import it right back into Calypso, and it would end up right back in the same spot. So the magic here is in knowing what we need for a coordinate system, right? So we want to move this model from top to Calypso import. All right, well, to do that, we need to make Calypso import active. So we'll click on that and we'll hit equals. And now we can't see where that other coordinate system was. So when we try to move this, we're not going to have a quote unquote pinpoint. So just because I just did this in preparation for this video, I realized I need to add a point position that is at the origin. Now in this case, that happened to be at the center of this line. But sometimes your import position, just based on the way the model was created, it won't actually be at the origin, right? So you need to know where that origin really is to make this work. You need to give yourself a pinpoint. And in fact, that point right there, that would want to be in this template as well. If you're going to, save a Mastercam template for yourself, you would want to have the point there for where you're going to go from. Because when we move this, we want to make our Calypso import coordinate system active, right? And there you can see our X, Y, and Z. And now we can grab all of this. So I'm just clicking and highlighting on the screen, and I'll come over here to transform and I'll say dynamic. And the fact that I already highlighted all of that meant that the transform dynamic command already knows what I want to move. So now the first thing I want to do is pin my gnomon, or triad, or trihedron, whatever you want to call it. They all mean the same thing. I want to pin that to my part, and now it's pinned, and now I want to click on this gray point in the middle, and I just want to drag this over to here, and then say OK. Now, we've only completed part of this step right now, right? So now I'm just going to hit File, Save As, and I'll hit Browse. And just remember here, this wants to save as a .emcam file by default. That is not importable into Calypso. So we have to just hit the pull down here and change this to a step file. All right, so I'm going to name this mcam import -1. And you'll see why I'm naming it -1 in just a second. Well, if we come back over here into our Calypso, you can see the model that we already imported here. You can see that's obviously not coming in the correct orientation that we want. It's also not coming in the correct location. All right, well, let's get rid of this model. Probably the fastest way to get rid of this model is to just go File and Close All. We haven't done anything yet, so no big deal. We'll just close everything and we'll create a new measurement plan. We also, if we had some things in that file that were valuable, we could have come into the CAD and modify CAD entities window. We could have come into hierarchy and we could have deleted all the CAD models that way as well. Or we could have done edit body and we could have clicked on every single model on the screen and we could have said delete body, and that would have gotten us to exactly the same spot. So depending on your application, one may be faster than another. All right, so we'll go CAD file load, and now we're going to grab MCAM import -1, and I'll say open, and let's take a look at where this ends up. All right, so it looks like this imported exactly the same way, right? Like if we look at our, that's funny, I never did paste this. Let's paste that into PowerPoint real quick. So that's how it was before, and notice that this looks almost identical. There is one difference though. Notice the trihedron icon was on the part before and now it's not. So if we scale out, aha, I see. So that delta X, delta Y, delta Z that we built into our Mastercam file, that actually did move this to the correct location, but we never did correct the orientation. And this is why I save that as -1, because we're about to do this again, but we're going to have one additional rotation. We'll save the model as -2, and you'll see that we really only completed basically half of what we wanted here. We corrected the location, but we did not correct the orientation. All right, well, we'll come into Mastercam and, whoops, forgot a step here. We'll grab this and we'll say transform dynamic. We're going to make sure that we pin this at the origin so that way we don't rotate off in some funky, we don't move the location of our model, in other words. This is what I was talking about in the last video series with having a pivot distance. If you plant this gnomon off of your origin, the part will pivot around that. So that just gives you kind of weird performance. In fact, let me do that and show you what I'm talking about. If I plant this thing way over here, now when I rotate these models, you see how they're pivoting in space? That's really not what I want, right? No matter which way I go, it's going to have that weird pivot distance. That one happened to be pinned pretty close to where the model was. This one's pretty far away. So we really want to pin this so that it's at our origin. And now when we rotate, we can correct our rotation very easily without affecting where our part ends up. So if we just rotate that 90 degrees and we say OK, and then we go File and Save As, and I'm just going to save this as a different name, just so I have the other one as well if I want it. Remember to hit the file filter here and save this as a step file, and I'm going to name it the same thing, but it's going to be -2 now instead of -1. And then we'll come right over to Calypso again. And this time let's do this the other way. Let's turn our machine off and we'll go modify CAD model and we'll hit edit body and we can hold down Control and grab all of these bodies. Control A does not work here, so it'll actually get rid of whatever you have highlighted. So if we click on those and click delete body, you see this does work as well. I wouldn't do this if I just wanted a blank slate normally. I'm just showing you that it can be done. This is mostly helpful if you have one part that's in the correct spot, but you have a bunch of other parts that are not. So now when we come into hierarchy, you see all we have is entity 4 and entity 602, whatever that is. I think this entity right here is actually the point that we created in Mastercam, believe it or not. That would be this point that I forgot to turn off. This point right here, that's at the origin, is likely what that other entity is. You can see that little point. So anyway, that's that. Let's go CAD file load, and then we'll grab MCAM import 2. And in theory, this will drop right in there in the correct orientation and everything. All right, so it looks like that is good. If we want to make this look exactly the same as we did in the other video, I'll show you how we can rotate the entire model and how we can place this cylinder directly on top of this surface exactly like we did. All right, so if we want to do that, if we want to rotate our model and we want to rotate it about this point, that's going to be another Control A. We'll come up here to Transform, Dynamic. We'll plant this right at the origin, and we'll grab our, in this case, this is going to be our blue arc here. We're just going to rotate that 90 degrees and say Enter. And it's my opinion that these tools in Mastercam are just a lot friendlier, certainly than Calypso. And I would make the argument that once you get comfortable with them, they're probably they're easier to use than SolidWorks as well. You don't have all that, the dependency of the mates that you have in SolidWorks. Okay, so I also created another Transform Dynamic, and I'm selected only the cylinder. I'm planting the rotation point directly at that little blue and white icon in the middle. That is the centroid or volumetric center of this part. Right, I rotated the part minus 90 degrees. Now I'm going to modify the dynamic gnomon instead of the model. This icon means move the model. You click it, and now I'm moving my dynamic gnomon. And I'm going to pull the X by itself and plant it at the bottom. And then I'm going to switch back over to moving the model. I'm going to grab this and plant this up on the part somewhere. Okay, and it looks like I have now controlled for where the Z is. Now I'm going to pull the Y over so that it's centered, and maybe switching over to a translucency toggle might be helpful here. And then we'll pull the Z and we'll pin that. Whoops. We'll pull the Z and we'll pin that halfway as well. And then we want to, what do we want to do? We want to rotate this whole shebang 90 degrees. So we'll go, in this case, it's actually minus 90. Like I said, you can see how easy that is to move that around in Mastercam. Really a lot less dependencies, but you get the preview, you have the control of being able to rotate or move. You can do multiple parts at a time with this as well. We can go dynamic, and we can grab this part and 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 this part. So we're basically moving an entire subassembly, and we could move that subassembly off like this. Okay. In fact, this will look exactly like we did in the last video, but that's a nice little nugget there. Let's move this whole thing off exactly 2 inches. We're just going to move that subassembly off 2 inches. And now let's do a, you know what? I don't like the colors of all those. I'll right click and I'll clear the colors. I'm going to grab the colors of every single model here. I'm going to do a Control A, and I'm going to come over here to Model Prep, and I'm going to say Clear All. And then I'm going to do, and I'll hit Enter, and then I'm going to do a Control A again, and I'll right click, and I'm now going to change the color of these to gray. The one difference here is I want to come up here to the cylinder, and I want to right click, and I want to change this to a light blue color. And then I'll do a File, Save As, and this is going to be exactly the same result that we got in the last couple of videos when we were moving this in Calypso. However, now we'll end up with this entire subassembly moved off, which, as you know, in Calypso, that might be a bit of a headache to try to do that. And you can see in Mastercam that's much easier. The other thing I like is that this Mastercam file is now separate. So if I import something into Calypso and make a mistake, I don't have to redo all of those steps to get back to where I was. I simply open the same Mastercam file. All right, so we'll do a File, Close All, Yes, and then we'll do a Create New Measurement Plan. We'll go CAD, CAD File, and Load, and then we'll grab MCAM Import 3. Notice I'm taking my own advice here. I'm saving often, and I'm saving under a new name. So that way, if I do make a mistake, I can always get back to where I left off. So I guess this looks good. It looks like the orientation is correct. It looks like the colors came in here where everything is gray, except for that one part whose color didn't change for some reason. Notice this part did come in as blue or teal or whatever color that is. And our gnomon is way up here. So let's make sure this is sitting in the correct spot on the machine. Hey, all right, it looks like it is moving or sitting in the correct spot on the machine. All right, so the last thing I want to do here is, well, let's set a quick base alignment just to make sure that this actually works. So again, this whole time we're kind of simulating, we're using this assembly just because it was quick and easy for me to grab. It was already on Blackboard. But really, this could be used to represent a part. So all the parts, or I'm sorry, a fixture. So all the fixture files would be gray here, and then a part, which is represented in blue. So ultimately, once we get all this in here, we're using the fixture just to represent areas where we cannot move for collision detection. But then ultimately, we still need to align to our part. Well, our base alignment came in way up here. So that's not going to work for us. Let's make sure that we can get that base alignment to come down to the intersection. Let me move the probe out of the way here. We want this to come down to the intersection between the top surface, the front surface, and the left side. And you see how this is rotating with a pivot distance here? I really don't like that. I'm going to right click and say define rotation point. I'm just going to stick that on the part. And so I right click, define rotation point. I click directly on the part, and now the rotation works how I think it should. So we'll open up base alignment. We'll say OK. We'll hit the pull up. We'll say define select geometry. We'll grab the top plane. We'll define a line on the front plane. And then we'll put a point on the left side and say OK. And I like the preview. I like what I see out of that trihedron. And when I say OK, we should see that the preview will be applied. And notice that the machine, it's like, whoa, that moved our part way up to the machine. What's going on here? That moved up to machine origin. Well, let's turn off the machine and turn it back on. Aha, there we go. So that's exactly what we wanted. So Calypso simulation is just a bit hokey. Sometimes it has to refresh itself. Ultimately, to check our location, if we open up our joystick dialog and we go to base alignment and we type in X0, Y0, and a Z of 1 inch, and then we close out. Does that look like it's in the correct location? Yes, it does. All right. So I'd like you to do everything that you saw me do up until this point. Get your CAD screen so that it looks something close to this. And then grab that snipping tool, go new, and grab a very similar picture to what I have here. The only difference is, to get credit for this assignment, I asked you to hit the pull down, make it red pen, and then just write your initials on here. And again, this is just to make sure that everybody is actually completing the assignment and they're submitting their own work. So you'll save this as a JPEG, go File, Save As, and then you'll attach that to the submission field to get credit for this assignment. So thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.